Hello, Rams family. Welcome to Rams Latest, your daily source for everything in and out of the Rams house. I'm your host, Brady Petrik. Let's get into it. Starting at the top today with some final whispers coming out about the decision process behind taking quarterback Ty Simpson with the 13th overall pick. It's time for another game of Sean Said, Snead Said, today with a heavy emphasis on Rams owner Les Snead. So Snead gave an interview this week in an attempt to clear up some of the miscommunications around the draft process inside the Rams facility. During this interview, Snead said that the Rams don't historically do top 30 meetings because they give away too much draft strategy by showing your intentions to other teams. So Snead said that this year they did 66 private meetings with players, going to campuses so that the meetings wouldn't be publicly announced like a top 30. And these meetings did not always involve McVay and Snead, but 66 total meetings between Rams staffers and potential prospects occurred. And during these meetings, the Rams staff like to talk scheme and see how quickly the players can spit back the concepts, make adjustments, and compare it to football that they've already played. So apparently Ty Simpson had one of these preliminary meetings and then came to the Rams practice facility in Woodland Hills to meet with McVay directly. So just to confirm, Ty Simpson had met Sean McVay in person prior to the draft. However, Simpson added some confusion to the narrative when he assured on draft night that he had, quote, never met McVay before. So Snead confirmed that he and other Rams staffers had told Simpson to be discreet and not to tell anyone that he was visiting the Rams during the pre-draft process. And Ty Simpson held with that line a little too well and didn't tell anybody even through the first night of the draft, where he denied meeting McVay in an attempt to keep the pre-draft meetings covered up, which was his last given directive from the team. And all three camps, Simpson, McVay, and Snead, have since confirmed that Simpson had met with McVay and that he lied to hold the party line and that his attitude and behavior around discretion from before the draft could be loosened now that the pick was finally in. And you know what? I like it. For one, I think it shows that Simpson can be a team player and put the needs of the team in front of himself. He didn't turn this information around to try to get drafted higher or secretly leak the information anywhere to get to another team. He understood the assignment and he did what was needed to end up where the Rams could take him. And I think that shows strength of character and wise decision making, since the Rams really is the best place for Simpson to develop fully as a quarterback, whereas leaking this information might have gotten him onto a roster where he would be able to start immediately, like, say, the Cardinals. And from the Rams' perspective, I appreciate the secrecy. I mean, don't give anyone anything. The Rams have one of the most respected brain trusts in the league, both in terms of coaching and roster construction. And while it might seem vain to assume that other teams are copying what you're doing because you're the best, I think in the Rams' case, that attitude is actually warranted. Competitive edges are hard to come by in this league, and even information should be kept at a premium. In short, don't let crap your teams copy off your homework. It just lowers the curve for everyone. And speaking of copying our homework, it's become clear since the draft that many teams around the NFL are interested in copying the production that the Rams are getting from their tight ends. Now, before we go into this any further, I want to explain a few concepts and what I mean when I talk about 11, 12, and 13 personnel. So simply put, these numbers indicate the breakdown of offensive players on the field. The first number, the 1, indicates the number of running backs on the field for the play, and the second number indicates how many tight ends are on the field. So 11 personnel means that there's 1 running back on the field, 1 tight end, and by process of elimination, 3 receivers. 12 personnel means 1 running back, 2 tight ends, and 13 means 1 running back and 3 tight ends on the field. So Austin Gale from The Ringer had some great reporting this week around recent tight end trends. 33% of offensive plays last season had 2 tight ends or more on the field. Now that's the highest percentage league-wide since 2006. And also 21 tight ends were chosen between the 2nd and 7th rounds in this year's draft, with 8 of them being taken in the 2nd round alone. And both of those stats are the highest in their categories since 1970. So a real generational shift towards tight end talent in this draft. And additionally, adding a little more fuel to the fire, Jaguars GM James Gladstone said the main reason why his team took tight end Nate Berkshire, who was a reach in the 2nd round, was specifically because of his abilities as a blocker. So these trends on the field and in the draft make it clear that other teams are looking to add more big bodies to their line. And most teams currently leverage a lot of 11 personnel sets. And the reason for that actually goes back to Sean McVay as well. So 11 personnel offenses started to take off around the league right around when McVay started his tenure with the Rams. He was relying on them heavily in that time. And if you think back to the early days of Cooper Kupp with Robert Woods as a reliable number 2 and a bunch of swing receivers backing them up for sideline pickups or medium chunks over the middle of the field, that's a lot of what 11 personnel looks like. So this type of offense allowed the Rams to beat out teams with explosive plays in the back half of the 2010s. And this, in turn, led to a league-wide shift in defensive scouting. Long story short, with more quick receivers on the field, the defensive personnel shifted towards lighter, faster guys to help contain those explosive plays. So how did Sean McVay respond? Well, by wheeling out a 13 personnel set last year to put heavier bodies on those weaker dudes who were all drafted to cover McVay's original 11 personnel plan. And that's some genius game playing that only the most cutting edge coaches can really bank on. I mean, you create the new game, perfect it first, and then when everyone starts to copy it, you have the first instincts on how to blow the whole thing up and tear it down. So the Rams used 13 personnel more than any other team in the league last year, relying on their depth at tight end to create mismatches by covering and blocking these smaller defensive players. And the Seahawks were right behind the Rams in their 13 personnel usage, so it makes sense that other teams are looking to copy this scheme, given the success of the teams who've been able to leverage it. But the success of this tactic is very heavily dependent on not only a deep tight end room, but a versatile one as well, where big guys can block but also get open for the catch. And this explains why tight ends were such a coveted position in this year's draft. Other teams are looking to copy what the Rams have done by bulking up their tight end rooms and switching up their offensive rosters to focus on bigger, heavier guys to mismatch with those smaller defenders who have become prevalent over the last 5 years. Now, most teams only have enough depth to field 12 personnel or two tight ends at a time, so the 13 personnel scheme is still a special sauce that only the Rams and a few other choice competitors are able to replicate. But I think the most interesting development from this copycat team building is going to come down the road on the defensive side of the ball, when other teams start to focus on adding big dudes to defend the big dudes who are catching and blocking the ball. And what's McVay going to do when that happens? Well, he could easily yo-yo back to 11 personnel and start the whole shift all over again. I mean, that's the beauty about being at the head of the pack, is you're the first one who knows when it's time to turn around. And that's exactly the kind of game planning and smart personnel decisions that free up cap space to spend on splashy signings for big players. So, with a lot of roster holes plugged up with draft picks and a considerable amount of cap space left, I wanted to play out a few scenarios of similar splashy picks that the Rams could make to add some top-end talent in time for another Super Bowl run. An all-index, if you will. So, just to run down what the Rams currently have to play with, they have $27 million in cap space this year, which put them right in the middle of the pack in terms of available space around the league. So cap space is a flexible number with the abilities to defer payment and restructuring, always complicating the math, but 27 million is a pretty good number to hold in our heads as we go forward here. So what kind of additions can the Rams make with that kind of money? Well, the first and most obvious choice is for a star receiver. 27 million happens to be exactly the amount that Brandon Ayuk and George Pickens are each scheduled to make this year. Now, both these guys have had trouble moving on from their team so far this offseason, so it wouldn't necessarily be one of these guys, although I would love to have Pickens added to the team. But this price shows that 27 million can pretty much buy you one season of play from any wide receiver around the league who's seriously considering leaving. I'm thinking of Jawan Jennings, and he could definitely be had for this price, maybe even a little lower. As could Deebo Samuel, who disappointed with his production last year in Washington, but may have the chance of landing back in the NFC West now that the smell of the Niners has come out of his laundry. So as much as the Rams seem happy with their current wide receiver room, I think the remaining cap space could allow them to bring in one more stud if they think they need it, whether that's to actually improve their odds of winning or just to appease Matthew Stafford. But hey, both are valid strategies. But a star receiver would eat up pretty much all the cap space by himself, so another prudent option might be to spread the love a little bit and get some help on the defensive side of the ball. Now, the Rams already made their biggest signings of the offseason by locking down cornerbacks Trent McDuffie and Jalen Watson before the draft, but the Rams didn't take any defensive studs in the draft itself and didn't even take a defensive player at all until their last pick in the 7th round. So while there aren't currently any studs available on the free market, a couple of depth adds are still very much on the table here, and I'm looking specifically at Hassan Reddick and Cameron Jordan, both of whom are currently free agents. Now, Reddick went for $14 million last year, but his lack of production in Tampa might cause that price to come down a little bit. And Cameron Jordan made only $6 million last year on a restructured contract, so adding both of these guys could actually be feasible. Now, they're both a little bit past their prime, but they could be terrific depth adds for this young defensive unit, and they both have histories and big game moments that could be an added bonus for a defense that, while quite accomplished, is still a little green in the gills in big moments. And finally, I wanted to look at a crazy all-out way to spend all of that money in what I call the old dogs package, which is basically the same philosophy that the Rams took back in 2021 on their last Super Bowl run, but hitting the turbo button and really maxing out that all index. So this would require grabbing Joey Bosa from the Bills, who's currently slated at 12 million, and this would be similar to the Von Miller pickup from 2021, someone who's a bit over the hill but could still maybe get some impressive play, especially in the back half of the season if he hasn't been popping off too much in the start. And then for receiver help, Stephon Diggs from the Patriots is available. He's a little pricey, but I bet he could be talked down by the prospect of joining the Rams specifically. Simply put, I think the guy wants a ring. And he's a reliable off-field presence and well past his best years, but I still think he can haul in the occasional crazy pass and could be a consistency guy for Stafford. And personally, I don't like the pickup very much. I think that Diggs is a bit too much of a liability on and off the field, but it smells a lot like the Odell Beckham Jr. trade from 2021. Again, just giving another set of reliable, seasoned hands and getting some extra trust for Stafford to have a third read option, especially with a lot of new tight ends in the building. I think Tyreek Hill also fits the bill for this wide receiver pickup, but honestly, I think he's too risky of a pick even for the all-in Rams, so let's not entertain it. We'll keep checking in with the all-index as the season gets closer and as other moves are made around the league, but let's wrap up today by focusing back on our little corner of the NFL, the NFC West, and take a look at how our main rival, the Seattle Seahawks, are handling team building this season, in a segment I like to call, What Are You Doing? Seattle Seahawks, what are you doing? Where else can we start but with that first round pick of yours? Now, everyone knew you were going to pick Jadarian Price with your first pick. I mean, so much so that you never got a call about trading back. And I know that John Snyder is typically a front office pro, but maybe you could learn something about pre-draft discretion from some of your division mates. And as for the pick itself, I think it was a little high, don't you? I mean, the next running back off the board at all wasn't taken until pick 90 when the Niners reached for Kalen Black in the 3rd round. And since the Seahawks only had 3 picks in the top 100, you'd figure they would use that first pick to fill in one of their bigger roster holes, like safety or cornerback after Reek Woolen left. And they grabbed a safety and a cornerback in the second and third rounds, but was the positional value add at running back really worth passing on first and second tier starters for their defensive needs? I'm not so sure. And I'm sorry, but I need to go back to the Seahawks' entire thinking about running back for a little bit. Now, the Super Bowl MVP and undoubtedly the Seahawks' most valuable player through the entire playoffs last year was Kenneth Walker. And the Seahawks agreed to let Walker walk, but with the assumption that anybody that they plugged in would be able to produce similarly. So was Walker the guy or not? Because he clearly wasn't enough of the guy to keep him around, but his position is so dependent on elite skill that you used your first round draft pick to grab the second best prospect in the draft. So which is it? Can anyone fill Walker's shoes, or was Walker elite and demanding of an elite replacement? It seems like the Seahawks don't really have a definitive answer to that question, and I think that indecision was pretty expensive in opportunity cost at the end of the day. And on that note of Price being the second best running back prospect in the league, he was the backup on his college team, behind the number 3 overall pick, Jeremiah Love. Now, that's a tough situation to be in, and I don't fault him for that. And in fact, I give Price props for ending up so high on the board when he was a second stringer, but that doesn't really change the fact that he was a backup, which means he has less experience and is less polished in big game scenarios. Now, this is fine and even expected for a rookie, except it increases the likelihood of regression in a key statistic for the Seahawks, and that's turnovers. The Seahawks committed 0 turnovers in the 2025 playoffs, and if you ask me, that was the entire reason why they won the Super Bowl. Sam Darnold went from a reliable turnover merchant, especially against the Rams, to a conservative player focused on ball control, and that made all the difference. I think it's no exaggeration to say that the single most impactful play of the entire playoffs was the Rams' fumbled kickoff in the NFC Championship game. But the fact that the Rams never got to make up that gaffe with a Seahawks fumble or pick is the reason why the Hawks won that game by 5. So Kenneth Walker was definitely the linchpin of that offense during the playoffs, and he didn't allow a single turnover. And now you're replacing him with a rookie who was just playing backup, no less. Now, do I think Jadarian Price is going to fumble every game? Of course not. But do I think the Seahawks can keep that consistent level of no turnover play? Of course not. Turnovers are one of the most volatile statistics and often fluctuate wildly from season to season. Being low on turnovers is hardly a bankable strategy, but replacing the surest hands on your roster with an underexperienced rookie does not seem to be moving the needle in the right direction. So now the battle for the running back room continues, and you loaded up on cornerbacks in later rounds rather than committing to a player who you know can lock into your secondary. And I know y'all just won the Super Bowl and you're feeling pretty good and resting on your laurels, but that kind of assumption around your key positions is what leads to dramatic backsliding after a successful season. And this is the time to really dissect how you can make your team better, but what it looks like to me is a team that's been too busy drinking champagne to focus on next season. Now, take it from a team that went 5-12 the season after winning it all. Every other team in the league is looking to punch you in the mouth, or at least peanut punch it out of Jadarian Price's hands. Can he hold on to the ball? Can you? Well, that's all the time we've got for today. For Rams Latest, I'm Brady Petrik, and until next time, go Sheep.